Check, 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 check.
One of the things he suggested.
You talking. We're all live.
I'm not. But when we walk by, we need a video.
Son los trapos. Ajá. Sí, claro. Ajá. Wow. Ajá. ¿Y es solo materia carreras tecnológicas? Ajá. Ajá. Ah, qué bueno. Ajá. Algo que ver, no, el tecnológico de Buenos Aires nada que ver, digamos.
No,
pero
a ver, obviamente con tenemos.
Ajá.
And anybody that gives us You're here.
Good morning. Thank you for making your way over here from the other building. We're happy you're here this morning. We hope that you've had a great event the last 3 days. We know that we have. My name is Darcy Hardy. I'm Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Director of the Center for Advancing Learning at Anthology. I'd like to start by introducing your workshop facilitators this morning. First, to my right, Dr. Rob Robinson, who is Senior Director for Strategic Initiatives at Anthology. And then to my left, Dr. Joel Armando, who is Product Manager Director for Educators in the Global Client Experience Unit at Anthology. And next to Joel is Dr. Mirko Wiedenhorn, who is the Senior Director of Engagement Strategy in our Marketing and Communications Unit. The four of us are considered to be part of the Thought Leadership Group at Anthology. We work with our products and services, but we also work with the academic institutions from a more academic approach and provide thought leadership around much of the adoption and the uses of our products and our services. This is what we plan to do today. I know we have a small group in-house, but we still plan to go through this. We're going to have some context setting with a definition of digital transformation. We have a global survey results that we conducted during March and April, is that correct? That we'll be sharing with you the process for that survey, and then some of the results. We have also created a digital transformation matrix that we want to provide to you and go through. These are the elements that we think are critical for digital transformation, beyond or with technology and beyond the technology. We've also created a self-assessment for you to use for your organization or institution that is tied to the matrix so that you can see where you are in your digital transformation at your institution or university. And then, if we can, we'd like to have some breakouts in order to allow you to go through some scenarios and talk about how the digital transformation might impact the scenario. I want to ask, because we do have a small group, where you're from. If you could let me know what country you're from, that would be great. I'll start here.
I'm from Barcelona.
From Barcelona?
In a technological company.
Oh, wait, we have a microphone coming. They're bringing a microphone.
Yes, I come from Barcelona. I work in a technological company, and we are interested in work with Anthology as an integrators.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, good morning. I coming from Uruguay. I am a rector of the Technological University in Uruguay.
One of my favorite trips was to Montevideo.
Sorry?
Montevideo in Uruguay?
Montevideo, yes, Montevideo.
I am from Azerbaijan, Western Caspian University, located in Baku.
Great.
I'm from Latvia, Ministry of Science and Education, Deputy Director for Higher Education.
Great.
And hello, I'm from Spain. Okay. And I am also from Spain.
Great, thank you. It's nice when you have a small group and can have introductions. Let me just tell you a little bit about Anthology, because the rest of this workshop is not about our products and services, but in more of the larger context of digital transformation as we see it. Anthology, some of you may have been familiar with our previous name, Blackboard. Blackboard and Anthology merged in October, and now we are the largest ed tech company in the world as a result. Our aim and our mission is to help educate all learners in all ways, inclusive, providing access as much as we can do in order to enable learning to take place globally. We work with higher education. We also work with K-12. And in the US, we work with government and other associations, non-government organizations and companies with our products and services. We're also expanding internationally with many of our services along with our products. But as you can see, we have over 150 million users, end users of our products and services, over 80 countries, and over 60 SaaS products currently, and that's continuing to grow as I speak. Gives you an idea, we actually work in the areas all the way through the student life cycle, from lead generation to admissions, getting them into their courses, engagement, retention. Our enterprise applications, we have an SIS, we have a CRM, we have the learning management system, and we really focus on teaching and learning in the broadest sense possible. So with that, we want to get started by giving you a definition, since there are so many, of digital transformation. And to that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. We wanted to be able to have an articulation of this concept of digital transformation. Organizations, it's imperative that we move through this process to become more digitally empowered. And what we're going to use as this working definition comes from a paper that we found. It's actually from folks here in Spain. It's a really, really solid paper. We'll get this out to you, but there's that long link there at the bottom that gets to this paper, right? Digital maturity model for universities. And I'll just take a second to just talk about some of this, but this at the bottom here we see this functional definition of digital transformation, which consists of both digitalizing and detecting the potential of a technology to drastically transform the business processes, to create new services or strategic business process for the organization based on that technology. So there's a way to think about this. And this let's see if this pointer works. Not really. So I'm going to stand up here and look at this quadrant of digital transformation. In general, what it says here is to the bottom left, it's digital management. That means you're working with the tools that you have, but you may not be leveraging them to the highest potential. Up at the top left is digital innovation. We want to have elements of that we're trying new things, that we're innovating in a digital space. Bottom right, digital governance, that's an important component of making sure that we've got all the pieces and that we are doing things correctly and we're doing them legally and we're maintaining security. But really where all of our organizations want to be, regardless of where we might find ourselves on this, we want to be moving up and to the right. And this idea of moving to be able to leverage these assets in a safe, secure, and cohesive way to power innovation at our institution. And that's where we really begin to see the digital transformation of our institutions, is doing things in a new way. And I always talk about this when we're working with organizations around digital transformation. It's change. That's what this represents for many organizations, is change. And change can be scary. Change can be there are individuals in our organizations that are not necessarily going to be very excited about change because they believe that change is going to alter the mission or the reason that they're doing their work. And what we want to communicate is that this change, we're helping them do and accomplish their mission, helping students succeed in a new way by leveraging the digital assets that we have, right? So that's really what we're going to be talking about today broadly. Do you guys have any questions about any of this? It's a solid paper. I'll get it out to you guys. All right, Mirko.
So the next thing we wanted to talk about briefly is a global survey that we conducted in March and April that Darcy already alluded to, and just share some very high-level insights of what students and university leaders are sharing about what their expectations are for technology, how the pandemic has impacted things, and how that's caused a bit of a shift. And we'll use that to reflect throughout the rest of the session. So just to give you a sense of the respondents, we had over 5,000 individuals respond to this survey. You can see about an even breakdown between university leaders, and here we're talking about vice rectors, deans, and similar levels, as well as current students and the responses by country. You can see a broad global representation. So the first thing to talk about, I think we all know students experienced a lot of challenges over the past 18 months plus, given the pandemic, but you can see the one that they rated the most challenging for them was around their mental or emotional well-being. followed by financing their education. And I think here it's important to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily tuition and fees, which American students may have said, but also all of the costs around education, transportation to campus, food, housing, all of those elements, and clearly a high level of concern among the respondents. And then that third element was really what's their next step in their career after graduation or even while they're students, looking for that internship or finding a job. Those were the three key areas of concern. Obviously, there are other ones as well. But then at the bottom of this, you see only 8% of students said they faced no challenges during the last year, which, again, probably not too surprising given everything that we've been going through over the last year. But wanted to highlight those first three as something to just keep in mind as you look to continue to improve how you work with your students. We specifically asked them about course delivery. So how did they feel about online courses? What do they see as the future of courses and how courses are delivered? And you can see 41% of the respondents have a preference for all online courses. That's pretty high. I would venture to guess that that would not have been nearly as high pre-pandemic, because now students have had the opportunity. They see that in many cases an online delivery method works. They can be more flexible in terms of when they consume the course material or from where. And then 80%, 8 out of 10 students, prefer at least some of their courses to be completely online. So this raises some interesting elements for universities to think about in terms of how courses are offered. Are there opportunities to increase the number of courses offered online? It doesn't mean everything has to shift online, because clearly there are some, there's a 60% of students who prefer at least some in-person courses, if not entirely in person. But there's also that large percentage of students that is looking for more online options. So it's taking that back and thinking about what changes may be able to be made in how courses are offered and adding more online courses potentially. Along that same line, we asked this at a regional basis. So this is that regional breakout about course delivery preferences among students. A couple of things to point out here. You can see a spike here. This is actually from North America, where most students are reporting that their current courses are fully in person. So there's a gap there if you think about the students that want online courses, right? This is way too high on in-person. You can see the other regions are relatively similar, with Europe being a little bit higher than Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Middle East and Africa actually having a lot of at least partially online courses. The other bump that we see is specifically the Middle East and Africa here, where fully asynchronous online courses, meaning online courses that do not meet at set times. The highest percentage is being offered in the Middle East and Africa in terms of the student respondents. Now, we also asked about their preferred method of course delivery, right? So that's that interesting element. What do they actually want to see happen? Remember this bar that was about 50% for North America? Look at where it is for their preference. 15% of students said they want fully all in-person courses in North America, and yet universities are currently offering fully in-person courses at 50% of that. Those are the disjoints, those are the differences that we look for here. Let me just click back and keep your eye on this chart, or these two charts, I should say. So those first two, because that's about that online coursework. You can see this is current delivery, right? This is what we looked at a minute ago. Look at what students are saying for how courses are delivered, and then look at their preference. Right, you can see all of those jumped up a bit. Now, some of it is just with the chart if you look at the percentages, but there's definitely increases there. So students are telling us again and again through this survey that they're looking for more online options across all of the regions. Some regions are doing this better than others, but there's still opportunity here. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Darcy to talk a little bit about that transformation matrix, and we'll keep sharing some of those survey results throughout the rest of the presentation today.
Thanks, Mirko. And we have some bags that have a card in them that will get you to the white paper that we've written about the survey and the survey results. So I don't know if we want to hand those out so that people have those and you can download it at your convenience. You know, I want to take us back just a little bit before we talk about this matrix and think about where we were with online learning before the pandemic. And think about your own country, your own region, and how much online was happening. Obviously, in the United States, we were doing quite a bit all the way back into the mid-90s. But other countries, other regions are doing just as much. So in Europe, I think before the pandemic, it was about 50% that was online. And after the pandemic, the projections are maybe it'll be 60 or 70% and onward. But the difference is in some regions, online was reserved for training, not academic courses before the pandemic. But as you know, during the pandemic, we were all forced to be online. Some schools were ready, some schools were not. Some faculty were ready, some faculty were not. Some faculty didn't like it, some faculty did. There were surveys of students during the pandemic who were not so happy with the quality of their experience for remote learning. But as Mirko pointed out in the survey, they still want it. They want the flexibility, they want the convenience, they want to be able to study when they want to be, they want to have choices. So the digital transformation now, compared to thinking about it before the pandemic, probably has more pressure because all students have been exposed to online learning in some way. So we put together this matrix, and you'll have a copy of that as well, where we thought about the various elements for digital transformation. Sometimes institutions, universities, will think as long as we have some of this, and we have good marketing, and we have some of these courses, that's all we need to start pushing for a transformation. It's actually much more complicated than that for a long-term success. Meaning, strategic planning, academic and instructional practice, the technology, and then student supports. All of those elements are critical for a digital transformation, and I want you to think for a moment of where your institution or your institutions you work with, where they are in that digital transformation. Where have they been focusing before, and where are they starting to focus now as a result of the pandemic? Because as we get out further from the crush of the pandemic, there will be more and more programs available and more students who want them. So I'm going to take a moment and just talk about the strategic planning column. One of the things that we talk to institutions about is that you have to have a clear vision. Now, you might be thinking of vision for your institution. This is talking about the vision for your digital transformation. Are you going to try to move a certain number of programs online as part of your transformation? Are you going to try to increase the enrollments through the transformation? All of that becomes the vision, because without a vision, it's very difficult to build out any kind of strategy on how to get from point A to point B. Does that make sense? So you have to have that, and many schools do, but many schools do not have that vision, and they're just sort of shooting into the dark, trying to find their way through their digital transformation. Organizational structures is another key piece here, because organizational structures mean how is the digital transformation, how is the online learning organized? Are there designers? Are there faculty mentors? Who are the people that are actually putting all of this together? And are they coordinated? Some schools will allow various colleges to do their own online learning. Other schools will coordinate that a little more. But knowing what the organizational structure is and thinking about what it needs to be in order to meet that vision is a critical part of the transformation. Policies and processes and guidelines are also a part of this. From the organizational structure, you get this. And the policies and the processes are things that encourage and drive the rest of this. So if your policies are about high quality, then you have to think about how we're going to get there in this area that Joelle's going to talk about. How are you going to get there if you don't have a process? So all of these items are contributing to that strategic planning. And last but certainly not least, is access. Access is one of the most critical parts of digital transformation right now. Access for students to get to the technology, access for them to be able to get online. That has to be part of this planning for digital transformation. So all of that is built into the strategy to meet the vision so that you can move forward with your transformation. And I'll let Joelle talk about the next column.
Oh, Darth, we got one more. Like, it's okay.
Survey. I'm sorry, I get excited about strategy, obviously. So going back to the survey, these barriers for education, and what I was talking about there in the strategic planning, these are the kinds of results that you can use while you're developing that strategy. Understanding that there are financial barriers. Students are worried about finances, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. They have physical barriers, trying to get to and from locations, moving to locations. They have technology barriers. It's a highly competitive selection process to attend university. And then family commitments. So all of these are barriers that are going to be challenges when you're trying to do a digital transformation. But the survey results that we've had can be incorporated into your planning so that you're trying to address as many of these as possible. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joelle.
Thank you, Darcy. Yeah, so the second column in our framework is academic and instructional practice. And we identify 4 elements in this area. So the first one is institutional readiness. And institutional readiness could, of course, be in any of these columns. But we think about institutional readiness in terms of academic practice. A lot of what goes there is the curriculum and how we make sure that the curriculum is structured in a way that really allows for flexibility and to create different type of structures. So it's our traditional curriculum based on degrees and subjects that go in a line and the students need to go through it won't work anymore if we want to provide short courses, stackable credentials, and so on. So that part is important. It's, I think, the hardest to change because you can put your courses online, but if you don't change the curriculum, they won't be really the possibility of, for instance, allowing students with non-traditional backgrounds to go into university or students to move and get the credentials internationally accepted. So that's the first element. The second element is course design and development. And usually it's the element that is more highlighted when we talk about digital transformation. It's basically moving courses from purely face-to-face to online or to a blended or to hybrid now. We're going to talk a bit more about that in 2 slides. Third element is faculty preparedness. And usually when we talk about faculty preparedness, the first thing that everyone will say is, oh, we do faculty training. So we train faculty on how to use the LMS. We train faculty on how to use the digital assets that we have in the university. And that's, of course, very important. But it's not enough. Faculty need to be prepared to design their courses online, need to be prepared to feel confident working with the students and developing the digital capabilities of the students. And also, it's not all on faculty. Faculty needs to be encouraged to do that. So they have to have incentives to spend time working on designing their online courses and not just maybe doing research, which is usually what is encouraged. So that's the third element of this column. And the final element that was absolutely highlighted by the pandemic is having an academic continuity planning in place. So we know now that things can go wrong, and suddenly we might need to absolutely go online with all our courses. And it's not only because we might have another pandemic, but we have worse, unfortunately. We have also climate change that is creating more and more disruptions in many different places. So having a plan for having continuity of education when that happens is a must now. So those are the 4 elements of academic practice in our framework. And if we have a look at the survey, and Mirko made reference to this, looking at specifically the course design and how much courses are moving to online, this is our current state, so the blue lines, the current state of online courses, and this is what the students expect, institutional leaders expect to be in 2025. So we are seeing here that institutional leaders are thinking that there will be much more fully online and blended courses in 2025, and less full in-person courses, so that goes in the right direction. But when we compare these results with what the students are expecting in 2025, they want more, and they are less confident that it will happen. So when we ask how much you will want, the percentage is higher, but when we ask, do you think it will happen, they say, we don't think that will happen in the same level that the leaders are saying it will happen. And finally, for this part, we wanted to highlight this difference between remote and online learning, because unfortunately, due to the pandemic, online learning got a bit of bad reputation, because many students and many faculty who never taught or learned online had to go through learning online in a way that is not exactly high-quality online learning. So basically moving their face-to-face courses in a week to deliver the same course remotely without the opportunity to redesign them for online delivery, without the opportunity to think how they wanted to do it. So what happened in most cases during the pandemic is what we call remote learning or remote teaching, and that's usually fast, minimal, primarily synchronously, so these 8 hours of video calls or having the exact 2-hour class in Zoom. No use of instructional design elements, or what all we learned in this, 30 years of distance learning, we couldn't use it because of a pace of a movement. And duplicated face-to-face, basically not necessarily using a learning management system, relying only on a video conferencing tool and maybe email to communicate. While if we're thinking about online learning, that's a totally different thing, isn't it? So it's basically that syllabus that we're planning to teach face-to-face needs to be reconsidered and rethought, and the assessment strategy needs to be changed, the communication strategy for the course needs to be changed, how the materials are going to be delivered to students needs to be changed, so instead of a 2-hour class, maybe it's a much shorter synchronous time with the students and asynchronous activities they can do by themselves, and also planning on how we're going to create that class experience that students have when they are face-to-face, isn't it? And that doesn't happen magically online. You need to create activities for the students to collaborate and to work together and so on. And that requires usually a learning management system and requires designing for collaborative learning. So I think that's my last. Yep. Handing over to Rob.
So this third column around technology, a lot of times we think that's what this is all about. When we talk about digital transformation, it's clearly just about the technology. But as you see, there's lots of other things that we need to be concerned about when we think about digital transformation. Within the technology, it is, there's a phrase, it is requisite but not sufficient. In other words, we have to do this well to do all these other things, but just doing this alone doesn't get us where we need to be. So when we think about the technology that we have, when we think about our institution, what is the ecosystem of tools that we have? What are the set or the suite of technologies that we have available to us? Are we missing some? Do we need to add some? And when we think about them, one of the first things we need to think about is, are they available to all the people that we need to use them? In a sense of certainly individuals with disabilities or different abilities. Are they around? Are they up 24/7? Are they available when we need them to be available? When we think about our technology planning, do we have? Are we looking out a year, 2 years, to have a structural plan for getting to where we need to be with the set of tools that we have? Do we have a strategy about how the various tools might work together? Because if we simply have this tool and this tool and this tool, and we're asking individuals to go to this one to do that, then go to this one to do something else, and go to this one to do something else, that may not be the best way that we want to accomplish our work. Frequently, organizations of all kinds, not just institutions of higher education, they just acquire and add, and then it's an additional work stream, and we don't think about how we can interconnect these things together. And that really leads to this idea of adoption. of the tools that we have and are using, are they being used? What is our adoption rate? When we talk about adoption is we intended for all of our students to use this tool, but only 5% of them are using the tool. Well, that may lead us back into this strategy conversation where we think about, should we make sure that the students, we can push them to use the tool, or is it the wrong tool? Do we need to find a new tool and replace the one so that we can, most institutions are watching the adoption as a metric of utility, right? We paid for this tool, we want this tool to be used. Is it accomplishing the goals that we want it to accomplish? And then going back to this idea of platform accessibility, it encompasses availability and access here, but as you've seen, we stressed this many times. Individuals are going to engage with technologies in different ways. And we want to make sure that when we think about adoption, we want to make sure that the individuals, as they're engaging with our technology platforms, are having the right experience, that it's not frustrating to them. One of the ways to think about this is from the standpoint of, if we're thinking about an online course, right? We should have multiple ways for students to engage with that content. For instance, if it's a video, let's make sure that that video is captioned, and that's not just for individuals who may have hearing difficulties, permanent hearing difficulties. It may be because our student is at a train station and it's very loud, but yet they want to consume that content. So they're going to turn on the captions, right? We want to make sure that we have multiple ways to get into our tools, and that's not just in the teaching and learning space, but that's in the administrative space as well. This is sort of the picture of what do students believe is going to happen at our institutions. Obviously, they believe that there's going to be more online courses, which is good because we all believe that, right? But we also think that there's going to be more optionality. That's what students believe is going to happen, right? So we see more courses available. I can interact with my professors, more flexibility in terms of how that credit is aligned. That's really an administrative process, but we need to think about that in the totality of what we're doing. More personalized communications based on my needs as a student, and more support in that career space. I'm working through my program. How am I going to turn this into an employment? And then more program options. This is what the students expect from us, and I think it's incumbent on us to be able to think through all of these elements that we're talking about so that we can meet these needs. However, leaders believe in something, in a different pace perhaps, or a different scope of what they hope is going to happen. Leaders at these institutions, when we surveyed them, they believe that there's going to be an increase in online courses. We've seen that very consistently. More competency-based education. Are we familiar with that idea of competency-based education? It is a non-traditional approach to how students move through content, and that it's much more granular with much more frequent assessments so that they can move at their own pace, not just the pace of our semester or our term. This is very consistent, more interaction between students and professors. We always worry about our students. Are they in the class? In the online space, we have to worry about our instructors. Are they being present in the class as well, such that there's an opportunity for engagement? And then more flexibility and personalization, absolutely. Mirko.
All right, thanks, Rob. So the last category here that we want to talk about is student support. And Darcy and I both alluded to some of this already earlier, but there are a couple of key areas to focus on here. One of those is training and technical assistance. And by that, we don't mean what Rob and Joel alluded to about training faculty. This is actually helping students understand how to use some of the technology systems that they have on campus. I think a lot of times we assume that they can figure out the technology because they're younger, they're supposedly digital natives, all of those elements, but it doesn't mean that they actually have the best practices of how to best use the software that courses are being delivered in, or that are being used in other ways during their academic journey. So having opportunities to actually train students will make them more successful. And that's the end goal with all of this, right, is ensuring that our students are successful, that they have a good experience, which brings me right to that second area, which is all about retention and completion and persistence toward their degree, so that they do stay at the institution and continue their studies, they persist and they don't stop out and then come back and they, in the end, complete their degree. You heard me refer to emotional well-being and mental health earlier based on the survey results. That's another key area for universities to consider as part of this student support area. How are you supporting students with their mental health and emotional well-being? Are there things that the university is doing? Are there opportunities to do more or to do things differently? We know that percentage of students that are listing that as a challenge has increased exponentially during the pandemic, but most likely that is going to continue to be a factor. It may not be quite as high as what we saw in the survey, but that will continue to be a factor for a number of students. And so supporting them with that will help them continue their education. And then that last category is that financial aspect. How can we make sure that our students aren't worried about how they're going to pay for their education or for their housing or how they're going to get food? What can we do to help them and make sure they're aware of all of the resources available to them, either at the institution or through other sources? So those are some of those key things to think about. And again, just pulling back a little bit of data from the survey, and this ties in a little bit to just training students in terms of the technology available, but they're also looking for ways that technology can help them be more successful. So here you can see most students would like to get reminders before assignments are due, reminders about meetings with a professor or a faculty member, or even when they have to register for classes. Now, to some of us, that may seem a little bit crazy that students are wanting all of these reminders when this is their job. But on the other hand, put yourself in the student mindset for a second. They're taking 5 or 6 courses at a time on 5 or 6 very different topics. Each of them have different assignments due at different points. They may have family commitments at home. Some of them may be working part or full-time while studying. There's a lot going on in their lives. In some ways, we have it easier because we have a full-time job. We go to that place, and yes, we have projects to do and meetings, but you could argue we don't have quite as many varied deadlines going on in our lives. So anything that we can help to make students just more aware of what's due and when, it's going to help them be more successful. And then similarly, students want recommendations about what courses to take. So if that's not something that you're currently offering to students, there are opportunities to do that through technology or in other ways, just to make sure that they're taking the right courses at the right time and the courses that are right for them based on where they want to be in their career. And then, again, we talked about this already a little bit, so I'm not sure why that's still in there, so let me skip that. But we also asked about barriers to higher education, and here you can see the regional breakout from the slide that Darcy had shared earlier, which was that overarching view. And just a couple of ones to highlight here. So, for example, financial barriers were cited by the most students in the Middle East and Africa, as well as in Latin America. Whereas, I'm just looking for another area, yeah, the Middle East also was the area that highlighted technology barriers the most, including lack of resources to support online learning, and that was followed by the Asia-Pacific area. So again, some regional data here to potentially help inform that strategic plan that Darcy had talked about as you think about how you make technology available and what those needs of your students are. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rob for a little bit of an exercise.
Great, thank you. So now we want to have you do a little bit of work, okay? So what we're going to be doing is taking these sheets, and it's an expansion of the matrix that we saw before. Do I have a picture of it? Yeah. So it's essentially each of these elements. And for each of these elements, we've got an assertion, right? So for vision, my organization has an articulated vision for digital transformation. Our ask of you is simply on this form, put a yes or a no there. And this is just you're thinking about your organization. It could be an institution of higher education. That's kind of what this is keyed for. But it could also be a company that you work for, right? Particularly if we're thinking about the education space. And so we want you to take about 5-7 minutes to go through this and just agree. And apologies that it's in English. If that's a struggle, we can help. Joel can help me translate. Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
And I would point out that if you'd like copies of this matrix for other schools or for other people at your associations, and you'd like for them to be in Spanish, we can actually take it and translate and send you a Spanish version.
So my ask is that you play along with us, you spend some time thinking about your organization, and then whether you could say yes or no to each of these assessments or assertions. And we've got them for all 4 of those columns, right? So, and then what we're going to do at the end of this, so it's one side and then do the other side, yeses and nos. I just want you to count the yeses and nos.
We're going to skip the groups. We decided we're going to skip the...
Yeah.
We're going to give you another copy to take back, and we would encourage you to keep your copy and have someone else in your organization or at your institution fill it out as well and kind of compare where you each see the organization, and see if you're in the same place. Some people may think that you're doing something really well where you may not think so, and vice versa. So it'd be an opportunity to compare notes.
Different roles are going to have different points of view from within it. And depending on the size of the organization and the complexity, not everybody's going to be seeing the entire picture. So they might. So are we all finished with this? So I would love to ask you, as you think about your organization, what were some of the areas where you assessed your organization as the strongest? What were the areas where you had the most, yes, I agree with these statements?
You have the clicker.
Nope.
No, I was going back to the first page. So why don't we think about in the strategic planning area, is there anything you'd like to share, anything that jumped out at you that you thought your institution or your group of institutions are doing particularly well? Do we have a microphone? The microphone? So you don't have to yell? I think for the recording, for the stream.
No, just in my previous institution, not in my present one, maybe the student support was the weakest part.
The weakest part was student support.
And the other ones were at the same level, I would say.
Good, okay. And,
Good.
and as you think about that from the student support standpoint, if you were at that institution now, where would you want to focus some of the energies? And what was the evidence or the when you were assessing it, what was going through your mind about?
Well, there we had a student support department, a small one, but depending on the different kinds of students, because we had 1-year students or 1-month students, then it's difficult to give a support.
Yeah. So. And this is where, I mean, this is not at all uncommon. And I think it's one of those things that was exposed during the pandemic is around what students need. I've worked at a lot of different institutions of higher education, all of them in North America, but they frequently optimize processes for the institution, not for the student, right? And it's a different mindset. We need the students to do X, Y, and Z, so here's the process to do that. We don't really care if it's hard to do, right? And then the students have to struggle with it.
In my case, I was working in a leading business school, so it has a quite advanced level of feeling about take care of students, well-run processes, but even so, there is always areas to improve.
Support.
Maybe I would say in a normal university, they don't care so much about students. Every time more, at least in Spain, no? Because for us in the business school, alumni were very important, but when you look at the universities, they are not so important. Well, it's a change of mentality, of course.
And I would say that's probably the area of all of these where there's the most variation across the globe in terms of just the amount of resources available for student support. Certainly in the US and the North American higher education system, that's something that's funded quite heavily at this point. Starting to see more and more of that happening in Europe, and Australia is a little bit different as well. But that's probably of these 4 categories where there's the largest difference, just in the ways that universities have been funded in the past across the world. So definitely still opportunities everywhere, though, to continue to support students a little bit differently, and even making a little bit of progress is progress. So you can't necessarily go, if you're an XYZ country that doesn't have a lot of history of supporting students, go get to the North American model, and you may not even want to. But if you make a little bit of progress in having something more available for students, or making them more aware even of something that already was available, that's still progress, right? That's still making their experience a little bit better. Those are the types of things that we hope you'll take from this. It's all about incremental small changes. It doesn't have to be this tremendous shift that completely changes your institution, because that's not possible in a day or a year. But smaller changes over time will allow you to enact complete change or significant change.
Which is why having a plan that gives you a roadmap or a path to follow for that transformation, as Mirko said, if you try to do it all at once, not only is it impossible, but you're going to aggravate a lot of faculty and students because you're moving so fast. But if you have a plan and you have a vision of where you want to be and have that plan provide a roadmap, that's a very different story. And one of the things that I've talked about before, Mirko and I were talking about it yesterday, institutions, regardless of where they're located in the world, depending on the culture of the institution, they have an expectation that the students will come completely prepared, whether it's for technology or whether it's time management or whether it's good skill sets so they can study on their own, self-paced, whatever it might be. The institution seems to think, or has traditionally thought, well, you need to come prepared. But as I say, in the US, not so much in Europe because it's free, except for Germany now, which is, I think, $500 a course. But in the US, I always tell institutions, the students are paying you for their education. You're not paying them. So why isn't it the institution's responsibility to prepare the learner for this kind of teaching and learning, as opposed to, well, we didn't do well because they didn't have good time management skills. Well, what did you as an institution do to try to improve that? So rather than putting it on the student, turn around and look in the mirror at your institution and say, what are we doing to really support those learners so that they can be successful? What else jumped out at you, whether it was something you're lacking or something you're doing well or something you've observed well? Anyone else want to share? I had eye contact.
Actually, we're on the way, I have to say.
Good.
We have appointed Vice Director for Digitalization. He's working on this area, but as you said, we're totally independent university. We don't get any funds from any side. Of course, around 35% of our students getting scholarship from government because they are good scored, or from different supporting organizations, or from Western University by itself, Caspian University. But it is just tuition paid, but not for research, not for rebuilding university, etc. So maybe if we do this, it goes slow, but to me, it is not main issue. It is most important is staff. They never thought that what pandemic could change, and they will be ready for that as well. They think that all response, especially in our society, people think that because of government trying to do a lot of things for them, including to explain them what to do, where to go, etc. So they expect that everything should come from government or university. You do, you change. The same happens with students. Maybe it is most difficult part of our process. So I have to say. So I put in this yes, no, sometimes yes, half, or no, 2/3.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
One thing that you touched on, and I'll ask my other facilitators to chime in, was, in my mind, what Joelle was talking about was academic continuity. And, we talk about the pandemic and how it sort of caught everyone off guard to move into digital, but there are other reasons with academic continuity. It could be a cyclone, it could be a flood, it could be a hurricane, it could be, some kind of terrible weather, it could be some kind of event, given the world we live in right now, that displaces the learners. So the institution needs to be ready at all times. And I think one of the best things that an institution can do is create an academic continuity plan that requires at least a minimal ability to work with technology for all of the faculty, so that they at least have a threshold of understanding and how to take their content and put it online as an emergency, whatever it might be. And having online modules for the students in case you had to shut your doors tomorrow because of some kind of problem, you'd be able to continue. Is that?
Actually, something could happen with online education as well, because it's so heavily dependent on technologies and
Right.
centralized services, etc. So I guess if not pandemia, anyway, we had to think how to change situation in education, because the traditional education based seriously on traditions of many thousand years.
Yep.
We have changed the furniture or design of buildings, but not methodology of education. When a teacher is telling what he knows, and with expectation that it would be enough for you to survive, for your well-being, which
Right.
is not true, totally.
Exactly.
So we get bigger expanding gap between needs of society and training programs which students get. Based on.
Absolutely.
And that's what the survey is telling us.
Yeah, it ties in very well. And it sounds like you're on the way, which is a good thing, right? It's just making incremental progress.
I don't know how speedily we will be able to
Understood.
go, but as many we try to see where to go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An anecdote about Latin America and what made, before the pandemic, like 10 years ago, what made increase the adoption of the learning management system in my university where I was working there, and it was strikes. So a student strike that lasted for over 45 days. They took the building of the university, so no one could in. So the learning management system adoption use increased like 150%. So everyone was using it like 3 times than before, and after that, all faculty had their courses online and so on. So yeah, talking about different things that can disrupt and having a plan. I think in France was similar. What happened with the
So we had a similar experience, but not in France. It was really in South Africa that when they increased the fees to access of the university, there were global strikes from students that blocked all the universities. And those universities that had a proper platforms and the option to move to online, they were able to continue. Okay, so yes, the university was blocked. No people were able to access the university, not even the system administrators. Okay, but those that had those platforms, even not only the platform but having them on the cloud, students were able to continue accessing. At least those that wanted to continue having the right of education. Okay, so that I know that was. That was some 4 years ago.
Thank you, Juan.
Yes, and well, there is like a paper published on that. Yes.
Any other comments about the matrix? Yes, sir.
Your comment. Thank you for the presentation. I'm not a specialist in this, but in our case, we have our university is very young. It's only 10 years, and we are in Montevideo, but our educational offer is in the countryside. And we adopted the digital transformation from the beginning 8 years ago. And now we are working with a group. We have a center for digital transformation inside of the university, working in this type of strategic. And for us, it's very interesting. My interest in staying here in this session is because we have very similar strategic for working with. It's not easy in education, really change the traditional education. In Latin America, it's not easy. We are working too much with the MIT, with the Technological Institute of Massachusetts in this type of courses. And for us, it was really a fantastic experience with the students, with the teachers, and also with the rest of the people of the university, because it's it's not only the educational aspect. You need to change the university.
It's a cultural shift.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely different. We are in that way. We are planning until 2022 2020 to 2025 in order to increase the digital transformation in different aspects. And really, it's very interesting. Some lessons and knowing this, but it's fantastic, really. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and in some ways, you had an advantage because you're new, because perhaps because you were able to learn some lessons when you started your institution, and you didn't have to go and say, we have to change 100 years of tradition, right? We're going to take the best of what we know how to do and go forward and do it. But change, regardless, is always hard.
It's the cultural shift that's probably the hardest part, and having someone facilitate and help with change management is probably a critical piece as well to get everyone on board. So I agree, you were lucky that you have a younger university and could start that way. I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. And let's see, let me get to, this is the QR code for the white paper that I think is, you also have the card in your bag, but if you wanted to download it right now, you can take a picture of that QR
all
code.
those survey results.
Is that the survey results or the white paper?
The white paper.
It's the white paper.
The white
that
paper,
includes
okay.
The survey. Sorry, I misspoke.
And if you wanted to go deep into the survey results, we could certainly help you with that for your region.
Yep.
So thank you very much for finding your way over here. We
It was a
appreciate you
journey.
being here.
And Darcy, if you go back one slide, there's our contact information as well.
That's
So
how you can find us.
feel free to connect with us also
Yeah.
if we can be of any help.
Very much appreciated you finding your way over here this morning.
Hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.